Hey everyone. So today we're going to do some tone building practice using a dip pen. I've got a Hunt 101 nib here, and as you can see on the paper, I've drawn a very basic grid with pencil and ruler. And you don't have to do that, but it's a way of kind of keeping your lines a little straighter and a little neater. But you don't have to. You can just freehand it. And what I'm doing is in each square, I'm going to place the lines progressively closer together. I'm using a nice even pressure on this pen. And this is something you can do with any pen, doesn't have to be a dip pen. Or if you're using a dip pen, you can use pretty much any nib. And just putting these lines a little bit closer together. Not by much. Another way of doing this practice would be to actually meticulously rule out with a pencil and mark a specific distance between each line and then follow that with your pen. But I think this is more than sufficient practice. We don't really have to go that detailed with it, but you certainly can if you want. Down here in the third square, just a little bit closer. And you can start to see, as you look from the top to the bottom, you can see that change in value. This is one of the simplest ways to get that value change, is just using single parallel lines and making them progressively closer together. As you can see down here, there's only about one line's width between each line and the next. So it's getting very close. I did a short video a while back on Instagram about parallel line practice, and this is where that comes in, is just drawing a grid and practicing being able to draw parallel lines is a nice practice to do, just for hand-eye coordination and overall pen control. Also a good way to familiarize yourself if you do get a new pen or a new nib that you're not familiar with. Just sitting down and making some random marks like this can go a long ways toward increasing your comfort level with that pen. So now the last one, these lines are almost on top of each other. There is not much gap there. It's a subtle change, a subtle darkening from the previous square above, but it is noticeable. Of course, it takes me longer to do the squares as I go down because I'm putting more lines in, which is true of any drawing as well. The more lines you put down, the more hatching or dense cross hatching that you do, the more time you'll invest into that piece. More lines equals more time. So keeping it tight here. It's not perfect. Again, we're not looking for perfection. Just enough to demonstrate that nice gradation of tone, gradation of value. So now I'm rotating the paper 90 degrees. Actually, I'm going to rotate it this way. And because I'm going to work this way, and I'm going to go light to dark, and I'm going to replicate this, but I'm going to rotate these lines 90 degrees, and you'll see the same sort of gradation. So I'm going to keep the lines about the same distance apart in this square as I do here. Okay. Next square, same thing. Again, not about perfection. It's all right if your lines aren't perfectly straight. When you're working by hand, they're never going to be perfectly straight, and that is part of the charm of a dip pen. It's a natural line, and it looks organic because it is. It's very much like handwriting in that respect. Next, just a little bit closer. As you look from right to left, running the lines this way, one after another, rather than having these sections on top of each other, it's a much smoother gradation. This is just a good, valuable practice to familiarize you with handling the pen. And the idea is, as I proceed with these videos and go more in depth with some of the techniques that I'm demonstrating here, is I will also demonstrate how to employ these various techniques within the drawing. So I'll be calling out sections of drawings where I use these certain techniques and how the practice can be applied to the final product, the final drawing. These squares, by the way, are 1 inch by 1 inch. So if you want to replicate the grid that I drew here, just rule out 1 inch squares. And the last one, with those lines almost right on top of each other. Some of these lines aren't quite as close as they could have been. But I think we can still see that gradual darkening of tone. Okay, so what I did is I went ahead and I duplicated these first two rows here. And the reason I did that is I'm going to demonstrate now cross-hatching. So with this first row here, or third row from the left, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw basically these lines on top of these lines. So I'm going to make 90-degree cross-hatching. So I'm crossing this grid at a 90-degree angle. This is the most basic way of cross-hatching. And you're just making a bunch of little grids, basically. A bunch of little squares. Like that. And same idea with the graduation of the tones. I'm going to make the next row still doing 90 degrees, but I'm going to match the gap between these lines with the gap between these lines, more or less. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but close enough that we get the idea. So I'm just establishing another value range, but I'm doing it with cross-hatching instead of parallel lines. It gives a little more depth to the artwork. Same idea here. Matching the distance of the first lines, 90-degree angle. You can start to see that gradual tone shift from the top of this column to the bottom. Right on down the line. The thing about pen and ink work, if you haven't noticed already, it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience. It is definitely a medium where you can't really be in a hurry. That being said, though, it is an extremely rewarding medium. It takes a while to master the dip pen. Any kind of ink drawing, it takes a long time to master it. But it is just extremely rewarding when you look back at something you've done and you realize how much time and care went into creating that. It's quite a feeling of accomplishment. It's a worthwhile investment in time. So these lines again, they're almost right on top of each other. Nice gradual tone shift. And you can see within each block that there's a little bit of tone variation because they're not perfect. And again, that's part of the charm of a dip pen, or just any sort of free-form pen work versus using a ruler and ruling it out. It's just I prefer this more natural and organic look. Some people prefer a more ruled look, which tends to work a little better if you're doing fine liner pens. You can rule with a dip pen. It's a little bit more tricky. I might cover that in a future video. But I do like the organic look where it's not a perfect uniform color. You can definitely get it more uniform than that. I'm just doing this as just an example. So next grid, I'm going to approach this from a different angle. I'm still going to crosshatch once, but I'm going to, instead of a 90-degree angle, I'm going to do roughly a 45-degree angle, just to show. I think my pen has to be cleaned here for a second. A little bit of dried up ink on there. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to hatch this at about a 45-degree angle. And I'm going to keep these lines just like I did here, the same distance apart as the first set of lines. And instead of making squares, you can see we're making diamonds. And it creates a completely different look. One thing I forgot to mention too about doing these grids, one of the nice things is it gives you a chance to practice starting and stopping at a particular point. So having these pencil guidelines, if you choose to, you can use this as additional practice to start and stop exactly on those pencil lines. So if you want to take additional time and be meticulous about it, you can just practice having that start and stop control, which actually really comes in handy when you're doing a drawing, especially if your style is a very precise nature. Then being able to start this line and stop it exactly where you want is of great benefit. Just thought I'd throw that out there as another thing, another practice you could do as you're working through this. So I'm maintaining roughly the same angle throughout all of these squares, and you can see how it darkens a little quicker because there's more, the lines are intersecting at a greater angle, and so there's more ink. The intersection points, I should say, are larger. And so it adds to that optical illusion of being even darker than it really is. And in general, this 90-degree hatching is a lot more attractive to the eye than the 90-degree. But that's also a matter of individual preference too. Nothing wrong with the 90-degree. I just kind of like this. It's 45. Probably because I like the more organic look, and when the eye sees a square grid, it just thinks more mechanical, which you can use to your advantage if you are inking things that are more man-made, or perhaps a cityscape. Then this 90-degree might be a good way to go. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to flip this around, and I'm going to ink this last row at a 45 degree the other way. So we're going to see how we can build a three-way crosshatch. Normally I would wait for this to dry, but since I'm not putting down a whole lot of ink, it's fairly dry. Dry enough to work. And so I'm just doing that third row of lines, 45-degree angle. And it just darkens right up. And don't worry about being precise as far as the location of the lines. If you're doing freehand work like this, you're not going to have this line bisect all the other diamonds perfectly. Your only concern is to worry about the gap between the new parallel lines that you're making. So, in other words, don't worry about where your parallel lines that you're making now fall upon the lines that you're crossing. You can see it starts to blend a little bit better. The more times you crosshatch, the more you're getting a true tone, a more blended tone. And last one. Maintain that wide gap. So there's one other exercise that I thought I could add to this video, and I'm still using the Hunt 101 nib. So this time The exercise is going to be similar to this first row, where we're just making parallel lines. And we're going to start out with a very light touch, evenly spaced. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. The exercise of this is we're going to gradually increase the pressure that we're using. So, coordination exercise, really. So I've done all these more or less the same. Now I'm going to put a little bit more pressure down, make a thicker line. Okay. Same pressure as the last ones. Now I'm going to increase it again. Gradual increase. They're not all going to be perfectly increasing in weight, but it does give you some idea of the capabilities of the nib that you're using. So with pressure, you're just increasing the width of that line. Of course, your pen is going to empty out of ink faster because you're putting more on the paper. Now, you might want to be a little careful. You don't want to go too much because you can break the nib. And I've had a couple nibs break on me and the little tips do go flying. So be cautious about how much pressure you do apply to this pen. But just to give you an idea of your capabilities with a dip pen. Everything you see on the page here, keep in mind, everything was created with one nib. And that is that flexibility, that ability to do all these different things with one nib is why I love dip pens so much. People ask me all the time, what pen did you use? Well, it's a great question, but it really doesn't matter that much. Yeah, there are certain things that certain nibs are, it's easier to do certain things with them. But you can see the range of things that I've been able to do. The range of line thicknesses and the range of marks that I've been able to do with this one nib. And that just goes to show you how you can create a whole drawing using just one nib. You could not do that, or it would be very hard to do that with a fine liner. It would be very hard to do it. You'd be doing a lot of building up of lines, which is something I do anyway, but you'd be doing a lot of this with a fine liner. You'd be constantly building your lines up to create a thicker line. And that's something you can still do with a dip pen, but you don't have to do it as much. So anyway, that's kind of the final exercise that I'm going to do on this grid. And in the next video or upcoming videos, I'm going to do different types of marks. So we're going to get a little bit more variation in what we're doing. I just wanted to do this as a really cool way of just showing the basics of cross hatching. And keep in mind too, with the cross hatching, I did one cross, so we have 2 lines, and then I did 3, cross hatched it twice over. So there's 3 lines here, 3 sets of lines. You can keep on going with 4 or 5. I think I rarely do more than 5, but you can just keep going until it gets solid black. And that's also a fun exercise to do. If you could do just 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5, it's really interesting to see how those lines interact. So, and try it at different angles too. You know, I've got 90-degree angle, 45-degree angle. You can do steeper angles. and see how that works as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Hope you all have a great day.